Hello everybody, Floppy Waffles 69 here, and welcome back to the channel. Hey guys, today we are going to be doing a full deep dive analysis review of the Tier 10 Pan-Asian Heavy Cruiser. This is Incheon. More specifically, or whatever, this is a Korean ship, or Korean ship of origin. But anyways, guys, the reason we are featuring the Incheon on the channel today is pretty plain and simple. Wargaming, as of this latest patch, has added the Incheon, in addition to various other premium ships or special ships also into the armory for doubloons. This ship will be costing you 26,300 doubloons if I'm not mistaken, which is an exorbitant price. That is very, very high and hefty, and it is my job here today to showcase this ship, talk a little bit about her, and decide, or basically help you decide whether or not she is worth it or not. At least in my opinion, for the price that you would have to pay for this specific ship, that is way too high. This ship is definitely not worth the price, and what it brings to the table as well. Then again, if you have the coupon and you think, hey, I really want a Pan-Asian heavy cruiser, then yeah, go ahead and feel free to buy this ship. I mean, at the end of the day, it is your money, but it's my job to tell you or showcase to you what the ship can do. So basically, what is the Incheon? This is basically a conglomeration of multiple other ships in the game thrown into one, and out pops the Incheon. This is a anchorage hull that has had subtle modifiers attached to it with the Tulsa turret, basically, and the Tulsa turret parameters, with the DPM that of the Des Moines, basically is the best way to sum up this ship, which might sound very intriguing to you, and it is. That's exactly what got me, was the fact that this ship's DPM was that just a little bit under by maybe 20, 30,000, less than that of the Des Moines and the Salem class, which is pretty crazy. And that only comes in the fact that it has one less turret. Other than that, this ship is pretty damn identical when it comes to the Des Moines in regards of its firepower. Obviously, this ship only has 8 guns. The Des Moines has 9, so you lose 1 shell going down range every 5 seconds or so, which again, this ship has DD dispersion and the Des Moines has cruiser dispersion, so there are some subtle differences between the two. But like we always do, we're going to go through some of the stats here on port, talk a little better, and then I'm going to go ahead and show you some gameplay in the Incheon. So without further ado, let's get started. First, we're going to look at the armor layout. And again, this is pretty standard for the tier. You're going to have your 25mm nose, your 25mm ass with your 30mm deck armor, your 30mm armor belt side plating, and then, your side plating, and then your armor belt is coming at 152mm. One thing to keep in mind is that your armor belt is an externally exposed citadel right here, right? So you can easily penetrate this citadel. It shouldn't be that hard to really punish this thing reliably. So keep that in mind when you're angling this ship, which you're going to want to do because you really don't want to bow tank in the ship. And I'm going to go ahead and show you some examples of that later on in the battle, unless you're forced to. And the reason why is you'll be having your DPM, and you really don't want to do that, even with DD dispersion. So that's basically 4 shells going down range with the build that I have every 4.8 seconds. It's really not worth it, and it's more like a brown alert moment when you're having or being forced into those positions. You really don't want to do that. I find the sweet spot of the Incheon is around that 12 to 15 kilometer range, in the pre-kited position, as your turret firing angles are very nice, and I will go ahead and show those here when we talk about the artillery. So starting off, we're going to go through the survivability. This has 48,600 HP points with a 16% torpedo belt reduction, which again, pretty standard. Going into the main battery, you have the 4x2 203mm guns. Your secondaries are the 6x2 127s. Going back to the main artillery of the 203mm guns with the build that I have, they are reloading in every 4.8 seconds. The turret traverse time is 25.9 seconds and your maximum range of 16.1. This is DD dispersion on the Incheon, so your shells are going to have a very nice grouping more consistently, as the sigma value is 2.05. Going into your high explosive shells, these are 2800 damage with a 14% fire and a 34mm of effective HE penetration. Again, this is going to translate as a stock build to about 12.2 fires per minute. Again, you can up that with Demo Expert and with your signal flags. Going on to the armor piercing of the ship, you're coming in at 5,000 maximum damage. which you have improved ricochet angles, which are same as like the Des Moines, for an example, from 60 to 68 degrees of those ricochet angles. Again, penetration is pretty nice. The only thing to keep in mind here is that your initial velocity is a little bit slower at 762 meters a second coming out of the barrel, rather than your HE that gets actually 823 meters a second. So you're going to have to factor that in, maybe just a little bit more lead time when shooting at your specific targets, or whatever target you're shooting at. Going into the torpedo tubes, these are the pre-buffed Jinon torps. You only get one rack per broadside, but you do have the torpedo reload booster to help compensate for that, so you can go ahead and shoot two racks of torpedoes per broadside if you so choose, rather than swiveling 180 degrees in order to get your other torpedo tube in the mix. They are going to reload in about 95 seconds with a maximum range of 13.5, with a maximum damage of 17,900, and then your speed of 69 knots with the 0.8 kilometer detectability range, which is going to give the ship a reaction time around of 4.3 seconds. Now, keep in mind that these torpedoes cannot hit destroyers. They can only hit cruisers, battleships, and aircraft carriers. So also they can't hit submarines if you're going to be cheeky with it. Really not worth talking about the AA defense. I find that the AA suite on this ship against tier 8 aircraft carriers is actually not bad, but the second you go against tier 10 and or God forbid super carriers, really feels a lot to be desired. Even with the defensive AA fire consumable is up, you might shoot down a couple more planes than anticipated, but they're basically going to still be able to strike you more consistently and suffer very minimal plane losses. It's really not going to help you in any case. Going to the maneuverability, you have a 33 knot top speed with a turning circle radius of 800 meters with a rudder shift time of 8.3 seconds. And this is the way I have it built, because in slot 4, I'm taking propulsion because I want to make sure I can start and stop a little bit quicker to get myself moving in and out of smoke, in and out of cover. Obviously, to me, if this ship does feel a little bit sluggish, and it comes down to that 800 meter turning circle radius. I know the numbers don't look too terrible, but trust me, you're going to see it's going to translate into battle. It just feels rather lackluster. So you're going to have to keep that in mind. This ship does not like to get in close and personal, especially if you want to maximize your effective DPM by getting all barrels on the target. So you're going to want to play at those ranges that I specified already, around the 12 to 15 kilometer range. You're going to get the most out of the ship around those ranges anyways. And then finally, coming in for your concealment value, obviously stock, it's coming in at 13.7. With the concealment module, like I have mounted, you'll get it 12.4. And then with your commander build, you can get it down to 11.17 kilometers. Keep in mind, you do have an 8.5 kilometer smoke firing penalty, which does rather bite ass. This is kind of why I don't like heavy cruisers, smoke farming cruisers, because they have that elevated or raised smoke firing penalty. So you're going to have to be careful where you smoke up, know where the enemy ships are located, especially those destroyers and submarines, before you start firing in your smoke screen and or even smoking up. It is nice to have smoke though, because you can basically fabricate and create your own cover, but it's kind of a double-edged sword, because smoke firing cruisers, or just smoke firing ships in general, are heavily reliant on allied spotting. So if you don't have spotting, it basically nullifies your gimmick. So keep that in mind as well. I find this ship to be more strong, or more sorted towards division gameplay rather than solo. But again, what does this ship do? It is a smoke reefer. It is a smoke farmer through and through. That is what this ship does. That is its intended purpose. So yeah, guys, that's basically the Incheon in a nutshell, with all the statistics that I've listed out. Again, we'll go ahead and talk about the commander build, the consumables, the upgrades all in battle. Because it just gives me something to talk about, and it kind of allows you to see why I chose those, upgrades or those captain skills. It gives you a better visual, right? So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the replay. Alrighty guys, and here we are in battle with the Incheon. Obviously, I'm going to go ahead and show the upgrades and commander skills here on the screen, just to kind of show you what I am taking. And I'm going to go ahead and discuss a little bit about the reasons why I'm choosing those specific upgrades and captain skills. Obviously, to keep in mind, for the upgrades in slot 4, I am taking that propulsion mod instead of the rudder shift mod. And trust me, I have tried it with the double rudder shift mod, and I just think the whole playstyle is kind of mad. It doesn't really work because of the floaty shell arcs and all that jazz. But yeah, go ahead and take the prop mod, and this is going to allow me to accelerate a little bit quicker in and out of smokescreen and around island cover. It's very essential for this ship to do that, as you are a heavy cruiser. You're not a light cruiser, and you have no improved propulsion anyways. So just ships like the Monmouth, Gibraltar, Minotaur, those kind of things. So you're going to want to make sure you take that prop mod, especially if you're going to be playing around your smokescreen, which you should be doing because that's what this ship does. It is a smoke reefer through and through. Then in slot 6, I went ahead and took the reload mod. Obviously, this is pretty self-explanatory. I want to up my DPM. I want to make sure I'm getting those Des Moines and Salem levels of DPM. I think it's 4.8 seconds is my, or 4.6 seconds, one of the two, is my maximum reload with this build. Really no sense in taking the range modifier on the ship, because once you're pushing out to your max range anyways, around 16 kilometers, your shell velocity is so slow, or at least it feels slow at 762 meters a second, that it's going to be harder and more, less likely to be landing shells on target unless they're stationary. It really doesn't make much sense, in my opinion, to be doing so. Plus, your maximum range of 16.1 kilometers anyways, that's more than enough that you can go ahead and smoke up with where you need to smoke up at and utilize that range effectively. Instead of having to kite away in open water, you can fabricate your own concealment essentially and take full advantage of that. Now, in regards of the commander build, obviously grease the gears because I want to reduce that turret traverse time as much as I possibly can. It is painful, at least for me on this ship, to have that. So make sure that is a balancing feature of this ship, at least in my opinion. That's why the only reason why I think they added it. So make sure that you go ahead and help yourself by taking that skill. Because again, in slot 3, when you're taking the aiming systems mod in order to decrease your dispersion even further, it's obviously going to, you could be taking the other artillery, whatever skill that increases your turret traverse time as well, but there's really no point because I want to make sure my shells are going exactly where I want them to go and take full advantage of that. Obviously, I'm taking Superintendent because I want to increase all the charges of my consumables by 1. That's kind of a no-brainer. And then obviously the big discussion here is the top grade gunner. Now, you don't have to take top grade gunner. I just recommend it for, I think you're going to get a lot out of it in a lot of situations. I think conflict is going to be getting closer and closer and closer, though you really don't want to be getting closer and closer, as I'm going to be showing you with this replay. So if you drop Superintendent, there are other, that gives you 4 points or frees up 4 points you can utilize in other skills. One that jumps out to me is your heavy AP. That'll increase your overall damage of your armor piercing, which again is what you kind of want to be using on this thing, as it's pretty dangerous, as you're going to be seeing for this replay, especially against enemy cruisers. But that being said, even when battleships disrespect you and show you flat broadside, it's not uncommon to be landing, or hitting them for about 7 to 8k. I've done it, and you can increase that damage even more so by taking your super heavy AP or whatever the fuck it's called. Another one is the outnumbered skill, and this is a big skill that I could see you utilizing on this ship, and I have played with outnumbered on this ship, and I would recommend it. The only problem for why I'm choosing the the other skill instead, the top grade gunner skill, is just because I feel like in order to utilize that skill, you're less inclined to be throwing yourself in bad positions, whereas outnumbered, you're finding yourself in bad situations just to get the buff. So I'm not a big fan of doing that per se. But again, you can get away with that and mitigate that by your smoke screen. Obviously, if I was a little bit closer up here, because of the amount of ships coming to this flank, I could take full advantage of that. Obviously, increasing my ship speed by 8% or 10% or something like that. And then obviously my dispersion by 10% or 8%. I can't remember the two. I always get the two confused. But it's a very valid skill, and you definitely can take full advantage of that as well. Hence, further decreasing your dispersion, right? Making it, going from DD levels, even further DD levels, like your fucking pinpoint accurate, Elbing dispersion. Okay, maybe not Elbing dispersion, but pretty damn close, right? So going into the weaknesses about the Incheon, this is really what I want to talk about. Because these are the weaknesses that I found within the ship. So obviously you have a slow turret traverse. You're only doing 8 degrees a second, and I think your turret traverse time is coming out to about 22.5 to 29.5, 180-degree turn time, and that's pretty painful, especially in a cruiser that's a cruiser that relies on its DPM and its fast firing. Obviously, sometimes when you're making those full 180-degree turns or whatever to disengage, you're only going to have potentially 4 shells going down range, which kind of sucks because you're theoretically having your DPM. So it's a big weakness that I find on this ship. So you're gonna have to make sure you pre-plan and position your ship accordingly to make sure you utilize all your guns, because trust me, you will feel the pain when you're only utilizing, your back 2 guns or your front 2 guns. Trust me. Another thing is the poor handling. You only go 33 knots with an 8.3 second rudder and an 800-meter turning circle. To me, this feels rather sluggish for this ship, and I don't know necessarily, maybe it's because of where the ship wants to play, but to me I find this very poor, which is thus further encouraging you not to close the distance and don't get it within those, 10 sub 10 kilometer ranges. I've seen some Incheon players do that, and it only ends very poorly for them when they get in that close, especially when they're forced to bow tank, because then again, you're having your DPM because you only have 8 guns, and if you're only bow tanking, you're only using potentially 4 guns. Again, another big weakness of this thing is because you're a heavy cruiser and you have a smoke screen, you have an 8.5 kilometer smoke firing penalty. This is pretty painful. This sucks. You're going to have to make sure you know where the enemy ships are before you smoke up, and especially when you pull the trigger. Because if a ship is spotted, or sorry, if a ship is within that 8.5 kilometer range and you smoke up and start firing, well, you're still going to be detected, basically nullifying the smoke screen for you. And then if that ship that's firing at you has a less smoke firing penalty than what, than where you're at, basically then they're going to be able to just free farm damage on you, and there's going to be no trading potential, which again is a very bad place to be. Again, the final weakness of the ship that I can find is you only have a 25mm nose, so again, furthering you to not bow tank. You cannot bow tank in this ship. It is incredibly painful, and especially having your DPM, which is critical. Okay, now let's go to some of the positive of this ship. One of the big positives about this ship, obviously, is that DPM and those improved ricochet angles on your armor piercing. This thing is quite the farmer when it comes to dishing out the pain. So one thing, again, that this ship does have is its firing angles, its gun or turret firing angles. I find are really exceptional on this ship, and allows me to basically sit in that pre-kited position while making sure I get all my turrets to bear on the single target, thus using and utilizing all my DPM on that target. This ship, because it's cranking out so many shells and has such a high DPM, even when you smoke up, ships will still fire at you blindly in your smoke screen. So you're going to make sure that you have to keep moving within your smoke screen. Don't just stand flat-footed, and especially don't get caught dead in the water broadside, because every battleship and cruiser in Oblivion will turn its guns towards you and nuke you, because you have a very high sitting citadel, and it's not that hard to penetrate, as it's only 152mm and it's exposed, which means there's no armor plating on the outside of that citadel. It is what it is, right? So you're gonna have to keep that in mind as well. But again, as you're seeing in the background footage, even because your DPM is so high, I can sometimes catch enemy cruiser players off guard that are sitting in their smoke screen, and I can just fire blindly, utilizing that island in the background as kind of a marker, so it's a lot easier for me to pinpoint where the exact location is of the Svei and go ahead and get those juicy Citadel ribbons. One thing I have not talked about with this ship is the torpedoes. Obviously, you have them. Again, we're not talking Genon levels of torpedoes, but it is nice to have torpedoes. These are pretty damn good zoning torpedoes if you need so, but I find these torpedoes mainly as torpedoes you throw in the general direction of the push that's inevitably coming your way, and maybe you'll get lucky. Obviously, the first torpedo salvo I had of the game, I got super lucky because I put it in an area that is known to have a lot of ships, a lot of traffic, which it was, ended up getting 3 torpedo hits. I believe 1 on the Svei or 2 on the Svei and 1 on one of the other ships, right? So though the torpedoes are good for that. Obviously, it also helps because battleships and ships in general are less inclined to push you because you have that. Of course, your torpedo firing angles aren't the best, so you're going to have to expose a fair amount of broadside to get those off. But again, if you time it right, you fire them when you're not detected or whatnot, then absolutely they can make use of them. And they hit pretty damn hard at 17,900. So going into my final thoughts about the ship, and about what this ship does, and this is probably some of the most important stuff I can share with you guys. To me, the Incheon is just not worth it. I don't think, I mean, I think it's a fun ship and I think it's a strong ship. I probably should start with that. But I just don't think it's worth it because for the price of doubloons that Wargaming is asking for, you can basically find a similar playstyle, if not a better playstyle or more impactful ship in game just by playing the game for free. Okay, the ones that don't hop to mind are the Des Moines. You get access to radar, you have way more team utility, you're a great cap contester, and you have a 27mm nose, right? To me, that just screams like a vastly superior ship than the Incheon. And then on the contrary, if you want the HE spamming role, the Jinan, look at its tech line sister ship, right? So to speak, the Jinan is going to have way higher DPM, way greater fire setting potential, and way more torpedo power potential as well. And your AA suite is pretty damn scary, especially if spec'd into. To me personally, I just think you can get the same similar play style in other ships you can basically just get by playing the game for free, right? And those two ships I can't highly recommend enough because they are both quite strong, and they're not sitting behind a 26,300 doubloon paywall. It's rather frustrating for me because the Incheon screams a coal ship in every way, shape, or form, and Wargaming, obviously with the Wishing Wharf event, which is where this ship was originally, released in, knows what they're doing, and it's pretty predatory. So to me, I think that this ship should be a coal ship through and through, and yet Wargaming, obviously begs to differ, and they're hiding it within the premium store for 26,300, which again, I'm not a fan of Wargaming directly outright selling tier 10 ships in this game, so that kind of sucks too. Obviously, going back to the Wishing Wharf event and where this ship was originally sold, very predatory event. I would recommend that you don't take part in those at all. They're very scummy because I believe it was something like you only get like a 2% chance to drop a ship, and once you have the ship, there's like 7 ships you can get, and then each one of those ships have a different rate of drop chance. So again, just wouldn't really take part of it. So, but one thing too that is a positive about the Incheon is that a lot of people they kind of underestimate the guns on the Incheon. I mean, these are essentially Tulsa / Des Moines level guns and firepower here, which the armor piercing is incredibly dangerous. So even when you think you're angled, especially when you're in a cruiser, you're really not. You should kind of over angle to really mitigate the potential damage that this ship is going to have, because you can reliably score citadels because of those improved ricochet angles. And I think a lot of people don't know about this ship's power when it comes to its artillery because the ship is so exclusive and kind of rare. I mean, either if you're not spending 26,300 doubloons, or if you didn't get the ship within the Wishing Wharf, I mean, the ship isn't very popular because it's so exclusive and rare. So a lot of people just, again, simply just do not know what the ship can bring and kind of the certain play style of this ship. If you want to label the ship a smoke griefer, smoke farmer, which it is, that's kind of a simplistic way of labeling it. Because it has the smokescreen and it has such the high rate of DPM and a decently good fire chance, I think the way that this ship really stands out to me is by switching from HE to AP and really making use of its armor piercing and taking full advantage of broadsides. And I'm not just specifically saying towards cruisers, because you're definitely going to want to shoot the AP against battleships as well, especially like sub 12 to 13 kilometer range, chunking that upper belt. I mean, again, I talked about this. You can easily hit battleships for 7-8k thousand damage a pop, and I've done it consistently over all the games that I've played with this ship. So again, with my final thoughts, the final thought here is that I do like the Incheon, and I acknowledge, I tip my hat to this ship. It is quite strong. I'm not going to sit here and say it isn't, blah, blah, and so. But the big reason why I can't recommend this ship is because of the price. It's just way too high, and I think this ship needs to be released as a coal ship in the armory, not a fucking premium or special ship that's for doubloons. So anyways, guys, we finished the game here with 146,000 damage. Again, nothing spectacular, just a solid average game that you can obtain in your Incheon. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed the analysis review of the Incheon. Stay tuned for more, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace out.